Hey, what's up? Hello, I hope you all are doing well. Today I am sharing 3 books that I have recently read, and I've only read the first chapters of them. So my partner has a lot of books on historical topics, all from one similar era, and also a lot of books that are translations or some satire or just a whole lot of very scholarly type fiction and nonfiction. 3 bookshelves worth, in fact. And those are just the books that are in our house. So I've selected 3 of them. These are 3 fiction books, I think. There was a nonfiction book, but it did not make the cut. So I'm going to talk to you today about these 3 books, again, that I've only read the first chapters of, and see how I feel about them. Spoiler alert, not super. The first book is actually a novella. It's The Fur Hat by Vladimir Voinovich, and this is a piece of satire about life in Soviet Russia. The main character, Yefim, is a writer who is very fond of writing books about what he calls decent people, and it seems to be narrated from an omniscient, third-person narrator until a few pages in, you get this one random me dropped in, and you realize that it's actually being narrated in the first person by someone else. This book is really actually quite interestingly written. It's sort of set up with Yefim, who's this zany main character who the narrator follows, and though we don't actually learn the narrator's first name or name at all in the first bit, this book hasn't got chapters, and so I sort of had to decide where to call one single chapter. So I gave it about, I think, 14-15 pages where there was a natural break in the book. And I learned in that first section that the narrator is this seemingly retired book critic that Yefim brings all of his writing to for advice and for feedback, but only positive feedback. He doesn't do well with negative feedback. So he brings his most recent novel to him, which is about mining some kind of ore, cobalt ore, I think it is, out of the ground, because cobalt is of great use to the government, and he seeks this feedback, and the narrator does not want to read this book. He tells his wife, this is terrible, all of this guy's books are trash, his writing is a crime against humanity. He doesn't say that, but that's kind of implied, and he absolutely doesn't want to do it. And he goes on to describe Yefim to all of us. He talks about his love of a big natural disaster. There's always some kind of big geological, tsunami or earthquake or something that happens in all of his books that are about decent people. And the interesting thing is that he's super okay with all of that, but Yefim is also okay with all of the sort of extramarital attentions that his wife has going on in the background, and his daughter, who has just moved out to Israel. There's a lot happening in this guy's personal life. This is also a man who has kind of lied about his military service to the government so that he can write that he was in military service when he has to write bios to talk about his books. So you learn a lot about the main character. You learn a little bit about the narrator and how he's definitely about to follow all of what I'm sure is an adventure with a very skeptical eye. I think I would actually be interested to read this whole book. It's probably somehow sacrilege to say this, but all of it reminded me rather a lot of Yossarian in Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, which is a book I enjoyed. So perhaps we'll see. Perhaps I will read this book. 3 stars. Next, I began Edwin, High King of Britain by Eduardo Albert. And I have a lot to say about this piece of literature. So this is the first book in a 3-part series called the Northumbrian Thrones Trilogy, which are written by a historian/journalist, Eduardo Albert, and they all take place in the Middle Ages, or the Anglo-Saxon period, if you will. The map in the front of the book, because this book does have a map, is 625 AD, I think, of what today is known as England. Now, because here in this house we're adorable, we name our houseplants with names, and so there's a number of houseplants here that we have that have Anglo-Saxon names. So it's helpful to know that because of those plants, I had a pretty good understanding of how to pronounce character names and relatively their levels of importance in history. However, I'm probably not going to say any of their names right today, which is okay because I know that I can always ask for corrections from my friendly household historian. This book starts off immediately out the gate with Edwin, High King of Britain, being told that he is going to be murdered, or that someone has set out to kill him. I'm pretty sure that person is called Redwald. And he and this man whose name begins with an F that I don't remember are talking about how he's going to keep himself safe. He goes for a walk in the night air. The guard gets really annoyed. I think he might actually meet an assassin who he thinks is God. There's a whole lot that happens in the first chapter. This book, as you can see from the cover, has a nice blurb at the top. Now, Bernard Cornwell, who's perhaps the premier historical fiction writer who sets his books in this same time period, calls this book a splendid novel that leaves the reader wanting more. And now we all know that when it comes to blurbs, you actually have to ask other authors to say something nice about your book. They don't really do it, you know, of their own volition. So let's take Mr. Cornwell's praise with a grain of salt. And I'm here to tell you, after reading about Edwin and his friend Athelfrith and somebody else and all of these other people, there's a queen who I think her name might be Emma, but it's spelled with a Y instead of an E. It's unclear. I'm here to tell you that this grain of salt we're taking this praise with should be very small. The first chapter of this book suffers from a misguided understanding of the writing tip show don't tell, where the author tries to show by doing too much telling. Every mundane moment, which ordinarily I would love to hear about, is like drawn out by one too many sentences, or in some case two too many sentences. And spoiler alert, the assassin may also be God. I know I said that, but who knows what's happening in that situation? Edwin certainly doesn't, neither does the reader. Everything is unclear to everyone involved. I don't think that I'll read all of this, mostly because I think the reality of what happened to these people in this time period is probably more interesting, and like I said, I have a human audiobook for that. A nice effort, though, I guess, to try and be Bernard Cornwell. Perhaps, though, we let the master stay the master? 2 stars. Now, the last time I made one of these videos, I ended the book with a romance novel that was allegedly written by Fabio. And regrettably, I can't do that this time. Regrettably, I have to end on a very different note, and that is with a book called A Time for Everything by Karl Ove, or perhaps Uwe Knausgaard. Knausgaard? Would help if I were Norwegian. I was told that this book is both amazing and incredible, which I think is an assessment that you can only make if you are actually interested in the content. Translated from its original Norwegian, this book is apparently about a young boy called Antonius who has some very, very detailed thoughts about his surroundings in a garden in the first section that I found. This book also doesn't have chapters, so I had to decide where I was going to call it. And apparently this is meant to be the Garden of Eden, like from the Bible. Long story short, TLDR, Antonius steps on an anthill, puts a worm through a hook, sees some angels, and cowers in fear. That's pretty much the first 18 pages for you. That's all you need to know. Those are the 3 main actions. This book, collection of stories, story, whatever you want to call it, according to the inside flap, which I read afterward, is using stories that feature, and I'm quoting, pivotal encounters between humans and angels, and is meant to be addressing the chilling questions of, can the nature of the divine undergo change? And can the immortal perish? Now, I may be an intellectual. Seriously, next month I'm presenting original research at an international research conference. While I may be an intellectual, this author's ability to employ his gift for minute description, especially of nature, but also of the human psyche, is beyond me. I feel like these large philosophical topics are better, for me, explored in nonfiction. Like, I want my philosophy to be less excruciating fishing trip with a wayward nephew, I guess. It's not my jam. I would much rather like type Michel Foucault, religion into JSTOR and then spend the day reading the results. I want minutia to be explored with the level of like casual, exhausted, contemporary disdain as a Tessemash Feg in my year of rest and relaxation. Not this. There's also a moment in the book where there's a sentence that begins, "When the residual image of the angels has cleared from his retina." Did I mention this book is also written in present tense? When the residual image of the angels has cleared from his retina, which felt jarring to read the word retina because this is a story about the 16th century, and I think for most of us living in the 21st century, the company Apple has made the word retina to us ring of something that is a very modern term, but apparently the word retina dates back to the 16th century, so it's super well placed. Comes from medieval Latin, all was well there, but the word retina really threw me off, took me right out of the book because I thought we were in olden times, and then suddenly I was thinking about iPads, so perhaps a lost in translation moment, but also an interesting word choice. So while this author may have written a book that, quote, deserves to be called perhaps the most significant literary enterprise of our times, I don't know that I have the capacity to be captivated by it. 1 star. And there you have it, 3 books that are not mine, that I judged very harshly and exclusively by the first relative chapter of their work. If you've read any of these and you have thoughts on them, I would be fascinated to know what you think. And especially if you've read The Fur Hat, let me know if you think that that one is worth my time, because I think it might make it onto my list. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having lovely weeks and lovely lives. If there's anything that you want to know about us, it is probably in the description, and we will see you very soon.